right, so here's a question that comes up often. Did Russia colonize Africa? The answer is no formal colonies in Africa. Unlike Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Italy, the Russian Empire did not acquire or administer African colonies. Russia's empire in the 19th century was continental. However, the US, like Russia, played no leading role and was not involved in carving up African territories. Okay. The US joined more out of diplomatic alignment with European powers than direct colonial interests like Russia. Hey, what's up, chat? Yeah, so we all know the latest that's happening in Burkina Faso with Captain Ibrahim Traore. But let's rewind. Let's, you know, delve into how he got there. Okay, so Captain Ibrahim Traore was born March 14th, 1988. Okay, he is a Burkinabe military officer who emerged as the world's youngest head of state when he seized power in Burkina Faso on September 30th, 2022. Right? Yeah, with me? Traore had been a frontline artillery officer fighting jihadist insurgents in northern Burkina Faso and even serving in a UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. Okay, so he was serving as a peacekeeper with the UN, right, in Mali, where he was cited for bravery. So he has a good military background and brave young fellow frustrated by the government's poor handling. He's talking about the active president at the time reigning uh, over Burkina Faso. He was frustrated at the government's poor handling of Islamist insurgency and lack of support for soldiers. He joined a group of young officers in ousting interim President Paul Henry Sadigo Damiba, who got in office by ousting government prior to himself. Okay, so that was September 2022 coup. At the time, nearly 40% of Burkina Faso's territory was outside government control due to jihadist rebels, and almost 2 million people were displaced by the conflict. This dire security situation, combined with public anger at endemic poverty, corruption, and the failure of previous leaders to contain violence, set the stage for Traore's takeover. Okay, so 40% of the country were being controlled and ran by jihadists. So Ibrahim Traore said, you know what? We ain't doing that. He was swiftly declared transitional president in October 2022, just a month later, leading a junta called the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration. Initially, he promised to honor a regional agreement to restore civilian rule by July 2024. In his inaugural speech, Traore described Burkina Faso as being in a state of emergency across multiple sectors security, health, infrastructure, etc., and vowed to prioritize the fight against terrorism while improving governance. At just 34 years old, then His youth and combat credentials made him a symbol of hope for many Burkina citizens weary of older, ineffective regimes. Interesting. You hear that, chat? He pointedly chose to forego the presidential salary, continuing to draw his modest captain's pay. Okay, so he humble guy, a gesture of austerity linked to Burkina Faso's iconic revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara. This bolstered his popular image as soldier president, fighting for the people rather than enriching himself. All right, so far so good. I can respect that. Does that make me a Pan Africanist? Okay, state of Burkina Faso before Traore. So before Traore's ascent, Burkina Faso had endured years of mounting instability. Islamist militants linked to Al Qaeda and ISIL began spilling over from neighboring Mali around 2015, launching attacks that escalated into a full blown insurgency by 2018. The government of elected President Roch Marc Kabore struggled to respond effectively by 2021. Burkina Faso was suffering hundreds of attacks annually, and vast rural areas have fallen under jihadist control. Popular discontent climaxed in January 2022 when Lieutenant Colonel Demiba led a coup that deposed Kabore, ostensibly due to Kabore's failure to secure the nation. However, Demiba's interim government fared no better. In fact, under Demiba, the insurgents extended their reach, controlling 40% of the country by late 22, as we said earlier, and inflicted heavy losses on the army. A disastrous attack on a convoy in September 2022 killed 11 soldiers and underscored the regime's impotence. Meanwhile, living conditions deteriorated. Drought and food shortages compounded the insecurity, and public confidence plummeted. plummeted. It was against this backdrop of military frustration and civilian despair that Captain Traore and fellow frontline officers orchestrated the September 22 push, pledging to refocus on beating back the jihadists. Okay. All right. So Traore's leadership and policy changes. Upon taking power, Captain Traore implemented significant shifts in Burkina Faso's domestic and foreign policy. Security strategy. Traore cast himself as a wartime leader and initially tightened measures, imposing curfews, suspending the constitution, and dissolving the legislature in the immediate aftermath of the coup. He rallied the army to retake lost territory and bolster volunteer militias, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, or VDP. And we have the FBA Defensive Unit, just a perfectly worded channel. You dig? To defend local communities, even referring to these armed civilians as our Wagner. In defiance of rumors, he'd hired Russian mercenaries. Despite aggressive rhetoric, violence actually surged in 2023. Islamist militants carried out more attacks and massacres, killing over 8,000 people in 2023 alone, according to conflict monitors. This made Burkina Faso the world's terrorism epicenter for the second year running. In 2024, the number of attacks declined by 57%, but they became far more deadly, averaging 14 deaths per attack, over 1,500 killed in 2024. Very sad. A single jihadist attack in August 2024 killed between 200 and 600 civilians. By early 2025, militant groups, primarily the Al Qaeda linked the JNIM, still control 40 to 50% of the country, leaving the government with at best 60% of territory under its authority. The humanitarian toll is immense. More than 2 million Burkinabe are internally displaced, roughly 10% of the population, and over 6 million require humanitarian aid amid the conflict and hunger crisis. In response, Touré's junta has doubt has doubled down on security, even announcing a joint 5,000 strong anti terror force in alliance with neighboring Mali and Niger in 2025. However, critics note that despite two coups justifying by insecurity, Burkina's security situation remains dire with ongoing atrocities and instability. Expulsion of the French military presence. One of Traoré's most dramatic moves was to cut military ties with France, the former colonial power. In January 2023, his government officially terminated a 2018 security accord that allowed roughly 400 Frenchmen special forces, Task Force Sabre, to operate on Burkina Bay soil. Burkina Faso gave France a once Burkina Faso gave France a 1 month deadline to withdraw its troops, asserting the country's sovereign was to defend itself without foreign troops. That didn't last long. By February 18, 2023, French soldiers lowered their flag at their Ouagadougou base and departed, marking the end of French military operations in Burkina Faso. This expulsion was motivated by a groundswell of anti-Frenchman sentiment in the Sahel region. Many Bernard Birkenbay, many Birkenbay, what am I talking about? Birkenbag. Many Burkina Bay felt France's presence had not improved security and viewed it as a vestige of neo-colonial influence. Indeed, popular protests against the French ambassador and military occurred around the time of Traoré's coup. The French embassy in Ouagadougou, please don't give me that word again, was attacked by crowds amid rumors later denied that France was sheltering the ousted Demiba. Traoré was framed the French exit as an ideological repositioning. The departure of the French army does not mean France is not an ally, but we have strategic allies too. Russia, for example, he said in May 2023. In other words, he opposed French policies, not the French people, and sought more balanced partnerships alongside ejecting French forces. Burkina Faso recalled its ambassador to Paris and demanded France's envoy leave in late 2022, further straining diplomatic relations. The junta also cracked down on French media. It suspended Radio France International in December 2022 and France 24 television in March 2023, accusing them of spreading false information and interviewing jihadist leaders. These steps underscore Ibrahim Traoré's effort to break from France's sphere of influence, which he had his supporters blame for decades of underdevelopment and insecurity. Pivot to new alliances, Russia and others, as Burkina Faso distanced itself from France and even withdrew the regional ECOWAS bloc. Traoré pursued a diversification of international partners. He repeatedly invoked the need for win-win partnerships that respect Burkina Faso's sovereignty. So, just off that, I can't get mad at a brother who said, "All right, France, maybe you're doing this good, maybe you're not, whatever." But the fact that you are a former colonizers, that ain't rubbing us the right way. You got to go. I don't got a problem with that. I ain't mad at you. You dig? So detractors of people who call themselves foundational Black Americans, Adolf's American freedmen, they think because we feel the same way Ibrahim Traoré feels that we hate other folks. No, it's not the case, man. We just know what's best for us, and we're going for it the same way Ibrahim Traoré knows what's best for him and his people, and they are going for it. We know what's best for ourselves and our people. So how can you, in one breath, champion Ibrahim Traoré going against all odds, and then criticize or oppose FBAs for going against our odds in America. Like, come on, make it make sense. In practice, this has meant a tilt toward Russia and to a lesser extent Turkey as key allies. Under Traore, Burkina Faso revived relations with Moscow that had been dormant since the 1990s, reopening the Russia embassy in oh my God, Ouagadougou, and enthusiastically attending Russia Africa summits. Traore has held Russia as a strategic ally and major arms supplier, expressing satisfaction with frank cooperation. In July 2023, he personally asked President Vladimir Putin for help in the energy sector. By October 2023, Burkina Faso signed an agreement with Russia's Rosatom to build a nuclear power plant aiming to double Burkina's very limited electricity capacity by 2030. That sounds great. Burkina Faso signed an agreement with Russia's Rosatom to build a nuclear power plant aiming to double Burkina's very limited electricity capacity by 2030. Russia has courted Burkina Faso with gestures like donating 25,000 tons of wheat and offering military training support. Notably, reports emerged in January 2024 that a first contingent of 100 Russian military advisors and structures arrived in Burkina Faso with up to 300 Russian personnel expected. Hmm, where was I? Okay. According to analyses by security experts, these are likely Wagner Group mercenaries rehatted as Russia's official Africa Corps, deployed to bolster Traore's personal security and train Burkinabe forces. This development came after an apparent coup plot against Traore in September 2023, which made the junta increasingly paranoid about internal threats. He even equipped, wait a minute, Traore's government has not openly admitted hiring a Wagner. I'm sorry, Traore's government has not openly admitted hiring Wagner mercenaries. In fact, Traore denies any Wagner presence, insisting our army fights alone. Wagner's presence was invented to harm Burkina. He even quipped that the real Wagner in Burkina are the local VDP militia volunteers. I don't know what Wagner is. I know Wagner's tied to Russia somehow, but I don't know what that is. Nevertheless, multiple credible reports up to 2025 indicate Russian fighters are on the ground in Burkina Faso as a substitute for the departed French, mirroring the pattern in neighboring Mali. This aligns with Traore's broader alignment with other military-led regimes in the region. Burkina Faso has formed an alliance of Sahel states with the juntas in Mali and Niger to cooperate on security and governance, collectively resisting pressure from ECOWAS, ECOWAS, and Western countries. In short, Traore has realigned Burkina Faso away from Western influence, expelling French troops and welcoming Russian assistance motivated by a mix of practical security needs and an ideological stance of pan African sovereignty. Economic and governance reforms. Domestically, Traore has launched a platform of what could be termed resource nationalism and anti corruption reforms. He has repeatedly evoked the legacy of Captain Thomas Sankara, the 1980s Burkina leader who championed self sufficiency in justifying these policies. Early in his tenure, Traore reversed generous salary increases that he previous junta had given that the previous junta had given to government officials, cutting back ministerial pay and perks. He himself famously draws no presidential salary and sticks to his captain's salary. Very humble. A fact widely seen as a sign of personal integrity. Savings from austerity were partly redirected to improving conditions for ordinary soldiers and civil servants. For example, local reports say civil service wages saw an uptick while officials' pay was trimmed, though exact figures vary. More concretely, Traore has moved to assert greater national control over Burkina Faso's key economic sector, gold mining. Gold is Burkina's top export, 16% of GDP, but for years, foreign companies dominated the industry. Under Traore's, the junta in 2023 suspended the export of unredefined gold and other precious metals, aiming to curb smuggling and ensure gold is processed domestically. That's a win. In November 2023, Traore led the foundation stone for Burkina Faso's first ever gold refinery, a state backed plant in partnership with a local firm that is expected to refine up to 150 tonnes of gold per year once operational. Quote, we will no longer be refining our gold abroad. We will know the real value of our gold, end quote. Traore declared, underscoring a push to capture more value from natural resources. Even more dramatically, his government nationalized two major gold mines in August 2024, the Bongu and Wagnion mines, which had been owned by a UK-based mining company. The state bought out these mines reportedly for $80 million after their previous owner, London listed Endeavour Mining, had sold them to another firm for a much higher price, $300 million, a year earlier. The nationalization was framed as reclaiming Burkina Faso's mineral wealth. To ensure profits benefit the Burkina Faso people, Traore has even warned that foreign companies from countries viewed as unfriendly may lose their licenses. In October 24, he announced plans to withdraw some mining permits from foreign operators, saying, quote, we know how to mine our gold. I don't see why we should let multinationals come and do it, end quote. This appeared to be a veiled threat to firms from nations that refuse to sell weapons to Burkina or the Traore perceives as neo-colonial. He did not he did not specify which permits would be targeted. Aside from mining, Traore also took aim at what he considered an exploitative deal in the aviation sector. In August 2023, Burkina Faso canceled a 220 million contract with French company Meridian that had been set to design and operate the new Ouagadougou Donson International Airport. That 30-year concession inked under ex-presidents Kabore was revoked due to its exaggerated terms. The junta flagged the unusually long duration and tax advantages for the French operator as contrary to Burkina's interests. By terminating this contract, Traore's government signaled that large-scale agreements made under previous regimes were subject to renegotiation if deemed one-sided. The state now plans to complete the new airport on its own terms. And indeed, Traore's administration touts the ongoing construction of the Ouagadougou Dawson Airport as a signature infrastructure project slated for completion in 2025. Okay, okay. You see what the chat talking about. What the chat talking about? In agriculture and industry, similar nationalist initiatives have been launched. For example, the regime set up a national support center for artisanal cotton processing to develop local cotton value chains and invested in agribusiness to reduce reliance on imports. Finally, Traore has turned away financial assistance from Western domination institutions. He rejected offers of loans from the IMF, World Bank, arguing that Burkina Faso must develop with the heavy conditionalities that come with such aid. Instead, the junta has sought alternative funding including aid and investment from Russia, the Middle East, and other partners. In summary, Traore's domestic policy has focused on sovereignty and self reliance, cutting off what he views as neo colonial concessions, taking ownership of national resources, and instilling austerity in government. These moves are popular with many Burkinabe, even as skeptics caution that such abrupt shifts carry economic risk, such as deterring foreign investment or mismanaging state run enterprises. After 2 years of Traore's rule, Burkina Faso's trajectory is a mix of bold change and persistent crisis. On one hand, Traore's nationalist and anti jihadist posture has made him immensely popular domestically and in Pan African circles, as we know. They are wild. They're not supporters, these Pan Africans in America and Jamaica and these places. They are fans. Okay. He doesn't need fans. He needs supporters. Like you guys are caught up on a personality and not the actions and ideals of a revolutionary. Surveys indicate that two-thirds of Burkina citizens support military rule given the circumstances, a dramatic rise in acceptance of soldier leaders compared to a decade ago. Traore himself often receives heroes' welcomes abroad. At a January 2025 event in Ghana with multiple African heads of state, he reportedly drew the loudest applause of any leader present. This reflects a broader phenomenon. A youthful African public disillusion with older politicians sees Traore as a symbol of resistance against corruption and Western domination. His image, often depicted in fatigues with tactical gloves, and his Sankara-esque rhetoric about imperialism have generated a kind of celebrity across Africa. Regionally, he has forged a new alliance with Mali and Niger, creating the alliance of Sahel states to collectively push back against external pressure and coordinate on security. All three countries, now led by military juntas, have even floated the idea of a federation or union of their states. This coup bloc has formerly existed. No, no, no. This coup bloc has formally exited ECOWAS, the West African Economic Community, signaling a profound geopolitical shift in the region. On the other hand, Burkina Faso's security and humanitarian situation remains very fragile. Traore has repeatedly postponed the timeline for returning to civilian rule, citing the ongoing insecurity. In October 2022, he agreed to an 18-month transition, but by late 2023, the junta announced a new charter extending military rule for 5 years, potentially keeping Traore in power until 2029 if stability is not achieved sooner. He insists elections will only be held when terrorism is under control. Sounds about right. Meanwhile, violence against civilians spiked to horrific levels in 2023, with thousands killed that year. And though the frequency of attacks fell in 2024, large scale massacres continued. Human rights groups have documented abuses by all sides, including reports of extrajudicial killings by the security forces and allied militias as they desperately try to root out insurgents. The conflict has driven over 2 million people from their homes and left over 6 million in need of aid as basic services in hard hit provinces collapse. Entire towns have been besieged by militants, creating pockets of famine. The economy, while buoyed by high gold prices, is under strain from security spending and the loss of some foreign aid. The EU and other donors scaled back support after the coups. Traore's government has sought new economic partners to compensate. For instance, it secured fuel and fertilizer deals with Russia and looked to Middle Eastern countries for investment. There are some signs of stabilization by 2024. Burkina Faso recorded a slight drop in total terror incidents, and the army claimed a few victories against jihadist bases. The junta also asserts that its resource nationalist policies will bear fruit in the form of increased state revenues from gold and other exports. In the coming years, however, concrete improvements in governance or development are hard to discern yet amid the emergency. Traore's break with France has also had a complex Traore's break with France has also had complex consequences. All 400 French troops did leave peacefully by early 2023, and Burkina Faso regained full control of the Camboinsen military base. French counterterrorism, intelligence, and support, however, were also withdrawn, a gap the Burkina Faso military is struggling to fill. To plug this gap, unconfirmed reports suggest hundreds of Russian private military operatives, likely Wagner or his successors, are now quietly assisting Traore's regime. This is a sensitive topic. Burkina's government vehemently denies any deal with Wagner, and Russia's foreign ministry also stated that no Wagner forces are in Burkina Faso. Yeah, you got to think. All right, put your tinfoil hats on if you need. Notably, Ghana's president, Nana Akufo-Addo, alleged in December 2022 that Burkina Faso had contracted the Wagner Group and even offered them a mining concession as payment, but Burkina Faso officials refuted this as false. Hey, man, you got Ghana's president, Addo. You dig? What's going on, man? Who do we believe? What feels like it's the truth? Okay. I don't know, man. I'm leaning towards he's rocking with the Wagner. He did acknowledge that a Russian mining company, Nordgold, long active in Burkina, received a new exploration permit in 2022, but nothing like the secret deals rumored. In summary, claims that Traore gave a gold mine to Wagner remained unverified and are officially denied. What is clear is that Traore welcomes Russia material support, weapons, training, but wants to avoid the stigma of relying on foreign mercenaries. As he put it, Burkina Faso needs equipment and capable partners, not foreign troops fighting on its behalf. If terms of the contract are partnerships, if terms of contracts or partnerships with European entities beyond the French military presence, Traore has indeed revisited several agreements. The French operated airport contract was scrapped in 2023, as noted, and Burkina Faso withdrew from the French backed G5 Sahel Security Alliance in late 2023, along with Mali and Niger. This withdrawal was due to the perception that the G5 Sahel, a five-nation anti-jihadist force, had failed to achieve its objectives and was influenced too much by France. Traore's government has had friction with European governments over sanctions and aid. For example, the European Union suspended some development aid after coups, and Burkina Faso, in turn, banned certain French NGOs for interference. Whistle, beep, pass interference. However, there is no evidence that Burkina Faso's wholesale canceled all European commercial contracts or mining operations. Western companies like Canada's Horizon and Australia's West African Resources still operate mines as of 2025. What Traore has done is issue warnings that initiate audits if a foreign company is deemed to be undermining Burkina's interests, especially if their home country is seen as hostile to the junta, their license could be at risk. So far, the most tangible contract cancellations have involved France, reflecting Traore's stance against the former colonial power. Deals with other European countries have not been dramatically upended in the same way. Aside from adjustments due to the unstable environment, for instance, a German funded solar power project or EU humanitarian projects programs humanitarian programs may continue but under closer scrutiny by the junta. In summary, Captain Traore has drastically realigned Burkina Faso's course since 2022. He rose to leadership on promises of restoring security and sovereignty and has followed through by expelling French forces, severing defense accords, and forging new partnerships with Russia while denying any secret Wagner deal. Hmm, what y'all think? He's rocking with Wagner secretly or what? That's what the Ghana president said. He has taken on a populist, anti imperialist mantle, cutting elite privileges, canceling or renegotiating foreign contracts that he views as exploitative, and asserting state control over resources like gold. These actions have made him a folk hero to many in Burkina and beyond, tapping into a continental zeitgeist that celebrates leaders who stand up to former colonial powers. Verified facts do show Traore's government has ended the French military presence in Burkina Faso and significantly cooled relations with Western nations while strengthening ties with Moscow and regional juntas. Let me read some of this chat. What y'all got going on? What y'all talking about? Y'all on topic or y'all off topic? He has not, as of 2025, reversed every European economic partnership. So y'all got to stop capping. It ain't just Russia. For example, European companies still buy Burkina's gold and aid from the EU and UN continues. But he has set a clear expectation that Burkina Faso will chart an independent path. Looks like he's more focused on the French. He's expelling them. Yet the outcomes so far are mixed. Security has arguably worsened in terms of civilian impact. Burkina Faso sadly led the global terrorism index in both 2023 and 2024. Damn. And elections have been postponed for potentially up to 5 years. The economy is under pressure, and millions of citizens remain in urgent need of food and protection. Traore's bold moves, such as the airport deal cancellation and mine nationalizations, are intended to correct historical imbalances, but it will take time to see if they deliver tangible benefits to the population or if they deter foreign investment without clear gains. Rumors and misinformation have swirled around his leadership, but many have been debunked. For instance, there is no confirmation that Burkina Faso sold out a mine to pay mercenaries. And Traore has publicly committed to fighting terrorism with his own troops and local allies, not mercenary armies, likewise. While some fear increased Russian influence, Traore portrays it as a pragmatic choice for military hardware and technical aid, maintaining that Burkina Faso retains its sovereignty. He said, I'm not selling out. In the final analysis, Captain Ibrahim Traore's tenure represents a new chapter for Burkina Faso, one of defiance against old alliances and experiments in self-reliance. He has ousted the French military, curtailed French media and economic footholds, and instead aligned with alternative partners like Russia and regional neighbors. He has pushed forward local ownership of resources and distanced his country from Western financial institutions. All these are verified developments up to 2025. Whether these changes will lead to a more secure and prosperous Burkina Faso remains uncertain. Nobody knows. For now, Traore enjoys significant popular backing at home to correct the exploitation of the past, but he faces the immense challenge of actually defeating the insurgency and rebuilding the state. All right, so everything sounds good so far with Ibrahim Traore and his rule in Burkina Faso, but now let's get into some controversial things. That okay, just because you like some things doesn't mean you gotta take everything. It is time to be unbiased. The question now is, are there women's rights in Burkina Faso? Women's rights in Burkina Faso are limited, especially in rural areas. High rates of child marriage. You heard me. High rates of child marriage. Okay, come on. Do we support that or you don't? Like, let's be real. They need to hire Chris Hansen and his sting operations in Burkina Faso to get rid of these child marriages. How about female genital mutilation? FGM is what they call it. It still persists in Burkina Faso, even under Ibrahim Traore. It's something that they're just born into and they think is normal. Okay, hopefully, well, Russia doesn't care about their humanitarian practices, so they won't speak out against it. But this is when they need to rely on the West to get them some straightening. Like, dude, and I know y'all sisters ain't sitting here capping for FGM, female genital mutilation. Let me know. Be real. Anyway, gender-based violence is underreported and poorly prosecuted. Woman, don't you say one word, I'm gonna slap your kufi off. The government has pledged support for women's rights, but Traore's regime has not prioritized this amid the security crisis. Right. But however, women do participate in civic and volunteer defense efforts, but there are few women in top leadership roles. The Constitution is suspended, as we heard, so there is no free speech, right? There is no Constitution. There are no Burkina Bay rights that's guaranteed to a Burkina Bay. Okay. Um, so Burkina Bay is not, I mean, I'm saying Burkina Bay. Burkina Faso is not communist or capitalist. However, there is no full-scale socialist or communist system. Private enterprise still exists, and wealth is unevenly distributed. Yeah, they got to work on that. Speaking of that, how does Traore redistribute wealth? Okay, well, he has promoted reclaiming gold and mineral contracts from foreign corporations, as we read, increasing government control over natural resources, we read, investing in rural defenses forces, VDPs, with food, stipends, and supplies. He has spoken of redistributing wealth to the real people of Burkina Faso. I guess that means, I'm assuming, right, that he's speaking about everybody but the jihadists. I don't know, right? He might be talking about something else. But there is no formal socialist wealth redistribution program yet. Okay. So far, redistribution mainly comes in the form of military-backed employment. Man, get a gun and fight. Increase local control of land resources, land, or limiting foreign exploitation. GDP is 20 billion, right? And GDP per capita, they're making less than $1,000 a year in USD currency. They work in agriculture, gold mining, and informal economy, small trade, artisans, transport workers, market-based and vulnerable to inflation and instability. That's their economy. Okay? The informal economy, small traders, artisans, and transport workers, market-based and vulnerable to inflation and instability. You got to fix that. Public sector military jobs are increasingly tied to military or civilian defense initiatives. You want a job, grab a gun and defend the country. That's how they're getting down. Okay. So you got Mali there. Mali has Colonel Assimi Goita. Okay. How come you guys didn't get behind Colonel Assimi Goita. He did exactly what Ibrahim Traore did, but before him, okay, he got rid of the French, okay? He postponed elections and got rid of the Constitution. He restricted freedom of speech. How about Guinea? You got Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya. Well, he was before Traore. Why we didn't get behind him? He got rid of the French. All these guys, including Mali, aligned with Russia. They postponed everything Ibrahim has done. These guys are doing. How about Niger? You got General Abdurrahman T'Challa. I mean Chichini. Okay, he same thing. Got rid of the French, aligned with Russia, and we don't know anything about him. Why Ibrahim Traore? Why not Goita? Why not Doumbouya? Why not Tachani? Ask yourselves that. Okay. All of them are military led with suspended democracies, right? What else? Did you know Burkina Faso was formerly Upper Volta? That was the name. It was a French colony from 1896 to 1960. Upper Volta is what it was called. It gained its independence from France in 1960. Okay. So France kept military bases and advisors in West Africa to protect its economic and geopolitical interests. After Islamist insurgency spread in the Sahel post 2012, Burkina Faso invited France back under security agreements. All right, so here's a question that comes up often. Did Russia colonize Africa? The answer is no formal colonies in Africa. Unlike Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Italy, the Russian Empire did not acquire or administer African colonies. Russia's empire in the 19th century was continental, expanding into Central Asia, Caucasus, Eastern Europe. Russia was more focused on Ottoman lands, Asian frontiers, and internal serfdom abolition, which ended in 1861. Why Russia didn't colonize Africa? No naval dominance. Russia lacked the blue water navy needed for overseas empires like Britain or France. Economic limits. Industrially behind Britain, France couldn't support global outposts. Geopolitical distractions focused on wars with Ottoman Empire, Japan, and internal instability. Orthodox Christian worldview, less missionary zeal in Africa compared to Catholic or Protestant imperialism. So, what was Russia's role in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85? What was the Berlin Conference? Held in Berlin, Germany, hosted by Otto von Bismarck to regulate European colonization and trade in Africa, led to the scramble for Africa, dividing the continent without input from any African leaders. Established rules for claiming territory, e.g., effective occupation, notification to other powers. Russia attended, but wasn't a major player. Russia did attend as an observer and signatory, along with 13 other countries, 14 in total: Austria, Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Norway, the Ottoman Empire, and the US. Russia signed the General Act of the Berlin Conference, February 26, 1885, so they were not innocent, but it did not claim any African territory, did not sponsor expeditions or protectorates, had no direct interest in African trade at the time, but they did sign the General Act of the Berlin Conference. They nodded their heads, said this is a good thing. Russia presence was diplomatic, They didn't carve up Africa, but were there to protect imperial balance of power in Europe. Okay. Why this matters today? Well, Russia flexes its muscle. Russia uses its non colonial history in Africa to promote itself as a friend to Africa. We never enslaved you, they will say. We never colonized you, they also could say. We're not here to lecture you, they can say. Common, and they have said those things. Common Russian messaging in Africa. This message resonates in countries like Burkina Faso. They fall for this Mali, Central African Republic, and Sudan, especially where anti French or anti Western sentiment is strong. Okay. And also is dominant in Western Hemisphere Pan Africanist circles. They will gloat that as well. I heard them do it myself, or heard them and read it in chats. But it's also a clever narrative tool. Russia may not have colonized Africa, but is still capable of economic and military domination today if unchecked. All right. But wait, there's more. Did the United States participate in the Berlin Conference? Okay, yes, the U.S. attended, but passively. The United States was one of 14 nations present in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85. The U.S., like Russia, signed the General Act agreeing to the principles of the partition, like free trade along the Congo and Niger rivers, recognition of territorial claims based on effective occupation. However, the U.S., like Russia, played no leading role and was not involved in carving up African territories. Okay. The U.S. joined more out of diplomatic alignment with European powers than direct colonial interests like Russia. Okay. So outside of establishing a colony like Liberia for the ACS, which I told you guys about. Come on now, get my flowers. The ACS is what they established in Liberia, and it was to relocate freed blacks, okay, to Africa. Okay, so why didn't the U.S. fully colonize Africa? Well, Monroe Doctrine 823, U.S. focused on keeping Europe out of the Americas, not expanding into Africa. So they're like, yo, go do Africa, but stay out of here, stay out of America. No colonial navy, lacked strong global naval power until the late 1800s. Racial contradictions. The U.S. was wrestling with slavery, civil war, and black leadership, not overseas domination yet. Economic focus. The U.S. was more concerned with internal expansion. Manifest destiny, the West, and Caribbean, Latin America markets. Public image. The U.S. branded itself as anti imperial, even while practicing forms of empire, e.g., in the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii later on. So, in summary, did the U.S. attend the Berlin Conference? Yes, as a passive participant like the Russians. Did the U.S. colonize Africa territory? No, like the Russians. Why did, outside of Liberia? That's for a whole different reason. Why didn't the United States colonize Africa like Europe? Focus on Latin America and internal expansion and lacked imperial infrastructure at that time. Okay. So, modern relevance. The USA today is often critical of Chinese and Russian influence in Africa, but rarely reflects on its own informal colonial role in Liberia or its passivity during European plunder of Africa.